The Colorado Avalanche are the Western Conference champions, and they will be facing the Tampa Bay Lightning in the Stanley Cup Final. Kyle Sullivan of Locked On Avalanche is with us to talk about what it'll take for the Avs to finally win their elusive Stanley Cup.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome back to the Locked On NHL podcast. Gil Martin, so glad you could join us today. And thank you for making Locked On NHL your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms. Today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. It's my pleasure to welcome to the show the co-host of Locked On Avalanche, Kyle Sullivan. And Kyle, welcome. It's great to have you here.
It's an honor to be here. Chris has nothing on me now. So
there you go. You've got it all covered. So that's great. And what an occasion too. Yeah. The Avalanche, they've been favorites for the last couple of seasons, came up short, now in the Stanley Cup Final and facing the two-time defending champion Tampa Bay Lightning. Let's start with this. The Avs have had a little time off where, the Lightning will only have like a 3-day break in between games. Do you think that the time off will be beneficial for the Avs, or it'll hurt them, or maybe a little bit of both?
If you would have asked me this question in 2019, I would have said this would have been concerning. The rest versus rust debate is always interesting. But ever since we had the COVID seasons and the shutdowns and how teams respond after the shutdowns, the Avalanche already suffered a COVID shutdown this year and this season. And they came right back and got back to their winning ways. And with injuries to Nazem Kadri and Cogliano, both with apparent broken fingers, depending on which one, they're all broken. But this is the kind of thing that you need, rest, rehab. Bednar's still not ruling them out for game one. And you have Darcy Kuemper, who missed the majority of the Edmonton series. This is the time to heal. This Colorado Avalanche team, they're determined to go all the way. So with this determination, they're not going to get rusty.
You mentioned Darcy Kuemper. Obviously, if you're scouting these two teams, goaltending is an area that the Lightning have an advantage on paper. How do the Avalanche respond to this, and how do they overcome that advantage?
I've been enjoying this narrative that Vasilevsky is the big crucial factor in this series. The Avalanche have played the Lightning twice this year, and they beat Vasilevsky twice. It's all about what the Avalanche can do offensively, and that's going to be hard to stop. Going through this playoff, you've had game winners from Darren Helm, Josh Manson. These aren't your household names, and they're producing in depth, and that's what you need. And Vasilevsky, he hasn't faced a team like Colorado this year. And yes, he's the household name and the one you want to point to as the best goalie in the league, but this is also one of the best teams in the league. They don't have the President's Trophy this year. They won it last year. But this team is built for the long haul. And I think that's going to be an interesting matchup, but I don't know if it's an upper hand, because in October, the Avalanche beat the Lightning in a shootout, and in February, they beat them just straight up. So this team has proven they can beat Vasilevsky now. It's what they could do when you can game plan in a series-type format.
There's so many talented players on both sides of this. I mean, the big names, we talked about Vasilevsky, Stamkos, MacKinnon, Makar. Give me a player on the Avalanche who is not a household name who you think could make a big difference in this series.
He's already been making his impact ever since he arrived in Colorado this year at the trade deadline. MacKinnon has been absolutely incredible. He sent Montreal to the Cup last year, and he sent Colorado to the Cup this year. His contributions have been absolutely incredible, and he is a player that, of course, on the Avalanche, you want to talk about like Mikko Rantanen, Gabe Landeskog, Nathan MacKinnon, Cale, Makar, there's only so many names you can list. You can't list them all. And MacKinnon, what he does on the forecheck and his scoring ability is very underrated and gets lost in the shuffle. But you expect big things in this big moment because he came up empty-handed last year. You know he wants his name on the cup.
One thing that the Lightning do very well, and we saw them do it against the Rangers, they get in the passing lanes, they get in the shooting lanes, they limit the opportunities. Obviously, with a deep team like the Avalanche, that's not going to be easy, but how do the Avalanche answer that strategy?
The Avalanche are really good at, they dictate play, and if someone tries to take them off their game, they can adjust, but they really can stick to their guns and wear you down. You could get in there and try and get in the passing lane and find success in the first period and maybe halfway through the second. But the Avalanche, it's a never-ending assault. It's once line 1 gets off, line 2 is just as strong. Line 3, line 4. We've seen at times Mikko Rantanen and Gabe Landeskog on line 2. And then you've seen a majority of goal scoring on lines 3 and 4. So you could get out there, and it's honestly best on best. If Tampa Bay can keep it going through all 4 lines, that's good, and that could help them. But the Avalanche just have this way of continuing to wear you down and then break you.
Give me the name of a player who you are most concerned about on the Lightning roster that, if the Avalanche can contain that player, they stand a very good chance of winning the series.
Well, we mentioned him earlier. It's what Vasilevsky are you getting? When it comes to offense, the Avalanche have 2 very serviceable goalies, and they've proven all year long they can stand up to whoever comes at them. We just swept Connor McDavid in the Western Conference Finals. So you could bring whoever. The Avalanche can stand up to that. It's if Vasilevsky gets settled, gets hot, that's what concerns me. If the Avalanche can get out there in the first minute or 2 and apply pressure, start rattling off the shots, and maybe get one behind him, and then have him on his heels, that's going to be the game changer. But if you let Vasilevsky get in there and get comfortable in his office, that's when things are going to get interesting.
2 of the best defensemen in hockey, Hedman, Makar. Talk to me about that matchup and how you think that's going to play out in this series.
With the narrative that the Avalanche have been painting all year, just like this team of destiny, and almost like this whole series, this is almost like a passing of the torch type scenario. Like, this is your back-to-back Stanley Cup champions. This is going for 3-peat Tampa Bay Lightning. And the Avalanche are built to be that next dynasty with players like Cale Makar, who we talk about all the time on the show, me and my co-host Chris Maselli on Locked On Avalanche. We talk about him being a positionless player. Like, he could be a forward. He's a stellar defenseman. He could probably be a really good goalie if they ever put the pads on him. He transcends the game. And this is one of those where you can pass the torch on to the next generation of hockey. You've seen the domination of Tampa Bay. Even though their cup opponents haven't been the most notable, this is the true test. Tampa will be tested in the series, and the Avalanche, if they want to continue to what they feel like they deserve, they have to get through this obstacle. And Cale Makar is at the center of this, and you see it in his play. And he plays a solid defensive game, but if he needs to score, he can at the drop of a hat.
Sounds like he would have been a great rover way back in the day in hockey. So,
yes.
Your prediction for the series, who wins, in how many games, and why?
Honestly, I'm not to sound like a homer here. I honestly feel like this is an Avalanche in 5 or 6. There's just something about this team, and I watch a lot of hockey. I watch every game of the playoffs. There's something about the swagger, the intensity, and just the way this team carries itself. This Avalanche team is meant for something. They've only lost 2 games in the playoffs so far. And you're sweeping Edmonton. You swept Nashville. You dropped 2 to St. Louis. That's an impressive resume. And this team has talked about all year. We've got our 4 wins, but that's not what we're here for. The narrative is we're coming back with the cup. And at this point, who am I to say no? So I'm here for the ride and letting Colorado do what honestly they have all year. They only dropped one game in the month of January. And like, who does that? Wins every game in a month. And they dropped one, and it was an overtime loss. So it's one of those, like, does it really count? But this team has done so much. Who are you to say, no, I doubt what you can do, because they've proven it all year long.
Kyle, why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they could find the podcast and where they could find you on social media?
Well, you can find the show Locked On Avalanche on YouTube. Subscribe. We're a cool bunch of guys. LOPN Avalanche on Twitter, Locked On Avalanche on Instagram, and you can find me at Shaggy Von Doom everywhere you look. Yes, that's a Full House reference.
Kyle, thanks so much for joining us. Pleasure to have you.
It was an honor.
Today's episode is brought to you by your friends at BetOnline. BetOnline.net is the number one source for all your betting stats and sports info. You can find all the latest sports developments, news, and odds, including this year's basketball championship matchup, the NHL hockey conference finals, Major League Baseball, and, of course, all the latest fighting news from MMA and UFC to boxing. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sports wagering information, including live betting, esports, and more. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and action. BetOnline, where the game starts.